The galaxy had been burning for centuries. Empires rose and fell in cycles of warfare that reshaped entire star systems. At the heart of this carnage stood two superpowers: the Arxley Dominion, a race of telepathic tacticians bred for precision war, and a coalition of sentient races, an alliance of every species that refused to kneel. Battles turned into wars of attrition. Planets were lost, retaken, and lost again. What remained of the civilized galaxy teetered on the edge of collapse, out of soldiers, resources, and time. In the Coalition War Council, desperation thickened the air like smoke. Strategies failed faster than they could be planned. The Arxley were adapting too quickly. Their fleet struck at will, bypassing planetary defenses and dismantling entire supply chains. Counselors screamed over each other. Entire species debated surrender. Then one advisor, a minor strategist in the correct caste, spoke a name long buried in the forbidden archives: Earth. The chamber fell silent. Earth, humanity, a death world species quarantined and sealed from galactic society for being too volatile, too unpredictable, too human. When first discovered, their warlike history and erratic social structures had terrified the galactic concord. Their homeworld, marked with climate instability, apex predators, and cultures that glorified violence, was labeled xeno-isolated. Observation only. No contact, no trade, no risk. But desperate times broke sacred rules. The Terrans are untested, the strategist said, but they are capable. We have footage from ancient observation drones. They wage war like no other species. They're imaginative. Imaginative wasn't the word others would use. Insane, maybe? Reckless. Dangerous. But in a war already lost, danger became an asset. Arguments erupted. Inviting humans into the war meant contaminating every agreed-upon doctrine of civilized warfare. What if they turned on the coalition? What if they refused to leave once the war ended? But eventually, fear lost desperation. A limited deployment. One regiment. One front. The coalition initiated first contact. When Earth's governments received the message, their reaction was a mixture of disbelief and grim curiosity. Aliens were real, and they were begging for help. Once the shock wore off, the proposition was studied, not just by diplomats, but by generals, think tanks, and black-budget organizations that had dreamed of extraterrestrial contact for decades. The offer came with promises: advanced technology, galactic status, shared infrastructure. But Earth's response didn't focus on gratitude. Instead, the question asked behind closed doors was simple. What's the catch? The catch was war. Immediate deployment. High-value, high-risk targets. Earth's leaders, after a week of silent meetings and midnight summits, agreed. But they drafted their own agreement. No command subordination. No tactical restrictions. Earth would fight, but on its own terms. Coalition representatives hesitated. Then they relented. Earth entered the war. The coalition expected a show of force, a dramatic parade of Earth's first off-world troops arriving to cheers and formality. What they got was cold efficiency. Human transport ships emerged from slip space without ceremony. No speeches, no insignias, just steel gray hulls and encrypted transmissions. On the planet HFY 4, where Arxley forces had dug in for over a decade, the humans were inserted under the cover of orbital dust storms. Coalition commanders expected to brief them, outline formations, routes, communication protocols. But the humans never showed. Scouts vanished into canyons. Units split into fire teams and disappeared into enemy territory. The Arxley reported strange patterns: minor supply raids, sensor anomalies, heat signatures that vanished before confirmation. A coalition general called it cowardice. Then, without warning, the Arxley command post on HFY 4 detonated in a precise, targeted explosion. No orbital strike, no frontal assault, just silence and then fire. Intercepted transmissions revealed something chilling. The humans had bypassed 3 layers of Arxley defense by navigating unmapped subcaverns. They used enemy patrol schedules, terrain weaknesses, and unencrypted data stolen from a drone wreckage. A team of 20 took out a fortress that had resisted siege for 9 years. Coalition High Command was stunned. No alien species had ever attempted infiltration on this scale. It was unheard of, uncivilized. To the humans, it was Tuesday. More reports followed. Arxley weapons caches destroyed. Drone control hubs sabotaged. Prisoners freed before coalition forces even arrived. In one instance, a human squad caused a mass retreat by mimicking Arxley distress calls using recorded pheromone signals. The coalition began to worry. The humans weren't just good at fighting. They were reshaping the entire operational landscape. And worst of all, they weren't asking permission. Coalition observers embedded in human units tried to document their tactics. What they saw was terrifying. Earth's soldiers used outdated gear modified with alien tech. They operated on Neuralink comms, bypassing standard encryption. One observer noted, "They move like they were born here, like they belong in the chaos." And, in a way, they did. The human military doctrine wasn't bound by tradition or honor. It was shaped by centuries of survival under pressure, by asymmetric warfare, insurgencies, cyber conflicts, guerrilla logic. When faced with a technologically superior force, humans didn't fight harder. They fought smarter, more ruthlessly. The Arxley attempted to adapt. They shifted patrols, hardened their comms, rotated units. But the damage was done. The humans had turned the front from a war zone into a chessboard, and only they knew the rules. Coalition analysts finally understood Earth wasn't just another ally. It was a weapon, a wild card, and now that it had been drawn, no one knew how to put it back. The Arxley began calling them shadows. Ghosts, wraiths in the dark. They'd scan entire sectors, detect nothing, then lose entire battalions overnight. Their soldiers whispered of traps set in advance, terrain that shifted, voices in their own language calling them into ambushes. To the Arxley, where it had always been elegant, strategic formations, psychic communication, honored duels between generals. Humans dismantled all of that in weeks. Coalition Command tried to reassure their allies. "The Terrans are on our side," they said. "They're simply unconventional." But privately, fear began to bloom. Unconventional didn't explain the level of disruption humans caused. Their tactics weren't merely efficient. They were psychological. They broke the enemy not just with firepower, but with doubt, paranoia, and fear. One coalition report detailed a night raid on the Arxley 9th Legion. No shots were fired. Instead, the humans hacked into the enemy's environmental systems, raising temperatures, disabling lights, and blasting frequencies that mimicked Arxley distress signals. By morning, the Legion had torn itself apart, some driven mad, others fleeing into minefields. No direct engagement, just understanding the enemy well enough to unravel them. Coalition officers demanded answers. Earth's response was calm. We engage as required to achieve victory. When pressed on their methods, a Terran commander simply replied, "You brought us here to win, not to ask how." Captured Arxley soldiers were interrogated for intelligence. Most refused to speak. Some begged to be returned to the front. Anywhere but wherever the humans were operating. One prisoner, trembling, said, "They don't fight. They hunt, and they don't stop." Earth's casualty rate remained incomprehensibly low. Coalition species were astounded, where they suffered thousands in frontal conflicts. Terran units reported single-digit losses after entire operations. Analysts tried to break down the numbers. The conclusion? Humans avoided battle whenever possible, and when they struck, they made absolutely certain the enemy couldn't respond. It was more than tactics. It was a philosophy. The coalition, bound by honor codes and procedural constraints, saw war as a dance of position and strength. Humanity treated it like a problem to be solved by any means, if that meant bribing an enemy officer to sabotage their own shields. So be it. If that meant triggering an avalanche to bury a supply convoy instead of fighting it, perfect. If it meant using civilian frequencies to impersonate distress calls and divert forces, it was done without hesitation. Coalition forces were horrified, but the Arxley, they were beginning to panic. Their command structures buckled. Their hierarchies, once flawless, broke under the pressure of unpredictability. They tried adapting. They randomized patrols, changed codes, started using counterintelligence. But humans had already anticipated it. It was like trying to outrun a shadow. One Arxley warlord recorded a final message before his stronghold fell. The Terrans do not follow logic. They are chaos in motion. You cannot trap the void. Coalition allies began to fracture. Some wanted to give the humans full command authority. Others wanted to restrict them, impose rules, define boundaries. Earth's response was firm. We don't play by your rules. That's why we're winning. Tensions reached a boiling point after the siege of Telmari Ridge. The Coalition prepared for a week-long campaign to dislodge entrenched Arxley forces. Detailed plans were distributed, positions marked, ships prepped. But just hours before launch, human operatives triggered a chain reaction beneath the ridge using buried seismic charges. The entire ridge collapsed, swallowing the Arxley position in a crater 5 kilometers wide. There was no battle, no assault, just dust, silence, and a recorded message sent to Coalition High Command. Objective neutralized. Move to next target. Shock rippled through the ranks. Coalition generals were furious. The humans had bypassed all chain of command, ignored protocols, and destroyed a target considered strategically vital. But they'd also saved thousands of lives and ended a campaign before it began. When confronted, the Terran field commander responded with characteristic bluntness. We don't throw lives at problems. We remove the problem. It wasn't just military efficiency that unsettled the Coalition. It was the culture of adaptability. Human units operated on autonomy. Squad leaders made decisions in the field without waiting for orders. They modified equipment, reprogrammed drones, and even salvaged enemy tech mid-battle. Where the Coalition saw disorder, humans saw flexibility. And it worked. Alien observers embedded within human squads often couldn't keep up. One report noted, they improvised constantly. I watched a soldier convert a power cell into an EMP with chewing gum and carbon filament. I don't understand how. Story spread. A human operative walked alone into an enemy camp disguised in a stolen Arxley cloak, sabotaged their ammunition, and walked out before the alarms even triggered. A sniper used mirrored lenses to bounce a beam around terrain, scoring a kill from over a kilometer beyond line of sight. A demolition team destroyed a planetary relay using nothing but gravity timing and debris. The Arxley couldn't predict them. The Coalition couldn't control them. And the humans, they were just getting started. A grim realization settled over the galaxy. The war had changed, not because of superior firepower, not because of numbers, because humanity had entered the arena, and they were rewriting the very nature of warfare. They hadn't come to participate. They'd come to win. The first signs came quietly. Coalition engineers noticed Terran weapons behaving differently. Standard-issue plasma rifles modified to fire in irregular bursts, tuned for atmospheric feedback, and integrated with terrain mapping sensors. No one had authorized these upgrades. Earth hadn't asked. They had simply taken apart the alien tech and made it better. Human units began deploying drones that weren't part of any known Coalition registry. Swarms of micro-machines moved through tunnels, air vents, even underground aquifers. At first, the Coalition assumed these were recon devices. Then they realized they were hunter-killers, semi-autonomous, capable of operating without command input for days at a time, powered by thermal differentials and scavenged energy. Arxley patrols stopped reporting back. Entire bases went dark. Human forces hadn't fired a single shot. In response, Coalition Command requested that Terran units submit all technology modifications for approval. Earth declined. You invited us to end your war, came the reply, not to file paperwork. The Coalition attempted diplomacy. Meetings were held, guidelines suggested. Earth attended one and sent an automated drone to the next. It played a single message on loop. Operational security is non-negotiable. What Earth had done was more than innovate. They had taken the rules of galactic warfare, torn them apart, and written their own manual. Human forces stopped relying on Coalition supply lines entirely. Instead, they began field manufacturing weapons from salvaged parts using mobile fabrication units. They used alien biotech to grow sensor-disrupting flora in enemy territory. They even tested localized weather manipulation for battlefield advantage. The Arxley attempted to retaliate by launching a precision strike against a known human forward base. They arrived to find abandoned, except for a beacon broadcasting Arxley war songs in reverse. An hour later, an orbital shipyard 2 sectors away exploded in a cascading power surge. Human signatures were detected, but no trace of how they got there. Coalition officials began whispering the unthinkable. The humans were no longer just soldiers. They were becoming something else entirely. A proposal emerged from within the Arxley Dominion, one that shocked even their own ranks. Parley, not with the Coalition, with Earth. Coalition leaders were stunned. The Arxley, proud and vicious, had never negotiated under pressure. Yet now, they were willing to treat Earth not as a faction, but as a force, one to be bargained with. It was a turning point. Human diplomats met with Arxley envoys under strict conditions. No weapons, neutral ground, no surveillance. What emerged from that meeting was classified, but the effects were immediate. The Arxley ceased operations on multiple fronts. They redirected entire fleets away from Terran-influenced regions. Coalition analysts didn't know whether to feel relieved or betrayed. Earth refused to clarify. "We secured peace in the most effective manner available," their envoy said. "You're welcome." Privately, the Coalition realized the war's balance had shifted, not because the Arxley were defeated, but because they were no longer the dominant variable. Earth was. Some within the Coalition demanded immediate sanctions, limit Terran access to intelligence, restrict their influence. But it was too late. Human operatives were already embedded across multiple systems. They didn't need permission anymore. They owned the battlefield. A data leak occurred. A Coalition intelligence officer exposed a classified Terran briefing labeled Red Level Contingency. In it, Earth outlined a scenario in which the Coalition turned hostile and how humanity would dismantle their infrastructure within 36 hours. The report included detailed assessments of power grids, supply depots, leadership movements, and communication relays. The implication was clear. Earth had planned for betrayal, and they were ready to win that war, too. Coalition leadership scrambled to downplay the leak, but the message had spread. Earth was no longer the last resort. It was the last word. Then came the viral footage. A human soldier, name redacted, walked unarmed into a fortified Arxley bastion on the moon of Eltros. The feed cut to static. Moments later, every camera in the sector lit up with the explosion that followed. The structure was vaporized. The blast was directional, precise. Only the command structure was destroyed. No civilian casualties. Then came the message, broadcast across every known frequency in multiple languages. "You called us when you had nothing left. Now we decide when it ends." The galaxy watched in silence. The Arxley did not retaliate. Instead, they pulled back. Their fleets consolidated. Their offensive ceased. Entire systems once drenched in firepower went quiet. Coalition forces cheered in the streets, but their leaders did not. They understood what had happened. Earth had ended the war, not through alliance, not through brute force, but by becoming something no one could challenge. They had not joined the galactic order. They had rewritten it. Earth was offered command seats, permanent war council positions, and tech-sharing agreements. They refused. Instead, Earth expanded outward, building new colonies, establishing independent supply lines, recruiting species disillusioned with galactic bureaucracy. They forged their own alliances, formed their own command networks. Not rebellious, just outside the system. When a Coalition representative visited one of these colonies to inquire about Earth's future intentions, they received a simple answer. "If war comes again," the Terran replied, "don't ask us to fight your battles. Understand that we end them." The galaxy finally understood. The humans weren't a weapon. They were the new paradigm. The war was over, not through treaties nor through surrender, but through silence, the kind that follows overwhelming dominance. The Arxley vanished beyond the outer spirals, licking their wounds, avoiding Terran patrol systems like haunted graves. Coalition forces returned to their core worlds with cautious relief. Peace, for the first time in decades, felt real. But it wasn't the peace they had envisioned. It came at a cost not measured in lives, but in control. Earth hadn't demanded tribute. It didn't install governors, occupy worlds, or rewrite constitutions. It didn't need to. The message was already imprinted across every sentient species that had witnessed the closing acts of the war. Never underestimate a species that evolved on a death world. Never invite them to your war and expect to survive it unchanged. Across Coalition space, memorials were raised to honor the fallen. Plaques engraved with names of soldiers, species, and entire planets lost to conflict. At the edge of every war monument, a new inscription began appearing. Not in Coalition standard, but in Terran English. "We warned you not to call us." At first, they seemed like pranks. Then they were everywhere, engraved, stenciled, sometimes projected in holographic flickers. No one admitted placing them, but no one removed them either. Earth withdrew from the Coalition Central Command but retained strategic outposts, not as vassals, but as neighbors. No species dared question their sovereignty. They had no need to assert dominance through parades or shows of force. They had already shown what they could do. Once, that was enough. Young species, those who had not participated in the war, began studying Earth's methods, not the technology, the mindset. Military academies whisper about Terran doctrine, a philosophy of warfare focused on adaptability, subversion, and maximum impact with minimum exposure. Some species banned study outright, calling it dangerous, corruptive. Others embraced it, creating their own hybrid doctrines. The galaxy was shifting slowly in Earth's direction. In secret, Coalition High Command drafted contingencies. Files were created: Protocol Black Ice, Operation Latchkey, the Terran Scenario, all classified, all contingency plans for what to do if Earth ever turned. Most of them ended in failure simulations within minutes. Earth's decentralized command, autonomous cell structure, and unpredictable strategy made them immune to the kinds of precision strikes other empires feared. They weren't centralized. They were distributed. Ideas, not institutions. Meanwhile, Earth invested in its veterans. Human soldiers who had returned from the front weren't hailed as heroes in grand speeches. They were quietly absorbed into new research divisions, exploration teams, and clandestine task forces. No parades, no medals, just orders. Because Earth knew the truth, peace was temporary. In the outer sectors, strange signals were detected. Deep space probes blinking out, ancient artifacts activating, whispers of something older than either the Arxley or the Coalition. And when the exploratory fleets hesitated, Earth responded the same way it always had, by preparing. They began recruiting again, not for a war declared, but for a war anticipated. Volunteers were drawn not just from Earth, but from species who had fought beside them, learned from them, or simply admired the results. These weren't armies. They were initiatives, modular, self-governed, equipped with technology that even the Coalition didn't fully understand. Some called them mercenaries, others defenders, but most simply called them what the Arxley had once whispered in fear: the last resort, because the name stuck. It wasn't just a warning. It was a title earned. Earth had been the final option, the wild card played when nothing else worked. And now, it was a benchmark by which all future threats would be measured, not just in terms of force, but resolve, the willingness to act without restraint, without hesitation, and without apology. A new diplomatic envoy visited Earth, this time from a species unaligned in the war. They came seeking advice on planetary defense. They expected a lecture, maybe a treaty. They were given a single phrase: "You fight to survive. We fight, so we never have to again." The envoy returned home, silent. Across the stars, whispers turned to doctrine. Entire worlds began restructuring military academies. Intelligence bureaus shifted from reactive to preemptive models. Psychological warfare, once seen as barbaric, became required study. But none of them quite matched Earth's edge, because no amount of mimicry could replicate the one thing that made humans what they were: a history forged by chaos. On Earth, war had never been distant. It had been tribal, then national, then global, fought in mud, sky, code, and silence. Genocides, revolutions, resistance. For every advance, a blood price. For every peace, a warning. No galactic species had ever survived that crucible. Humanity didn't just survive it. They evolved in it. And now, there were some the stars had never seen before. A predator with a code, a killer with a cause, a peacekeeper that smiled without ever sheathing its blade. So the galaxy watched, waited, adapted, and remembered. Because even long after the last shot was fired, long after the Arxley retreated and the treaties gathered dust, one truth remained, etched into the stone and steel of every battlefield Earth had touched. The last resort wasn't the end. It was the beginning of a new order. And its name was humanity.